The quarterback carousel has reached the end of the free agent line, and we're going to diagnose the last signings here at the quarterback position and what that does for the dynasty landscape. That and more in the Football Guys Dynasty Show this week. And Jordan, we got a lot of quarterbacks signed since a week ago, and a lot of quarterbacks in general finding the news this offseason.
Yeah, and the big, the story we've been waiting on for basically a year now has been the Watson stuff, and he lands with Cleveland. I think as we were recording this last week, there was like they were out, and now they're back. They were back in, and now they landed. They landed the big, the big offseason trade piece. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a suspension coming because of the alleged, alleged sexual conduct that he was doing. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be, we were talking before the show, what a loaded AFC quarterback situation. If you don't have one of these guys, like it's a really, you look around and it's like, all right, for the next 5 to 10 years, we're in a heap of trouble if we're not one of the teams that has one of these guys. And and for Dynasty, I mean, this puts Watson, I think this puts Watson up at the top of, right at the top of the position. And this is the quarterback right now that has the highest active yards per attempt, right? He's like top 3 in the history of the NFL, right? I mean, this is the type of, this is a Hall of Fame track on the field. And that's, I think people might forget how good he has been and what his resume has looked like on the field. We know some of the off the field allegations. On the field, we may forget how good he was in a not great situation. So I think this is a situation that's probably going to lift all of the ships, which we'll talk about a little bit in Cleveland, but should be, I think, top 5, top 6 in terms of your startup, your super flex startup drafts.
Yeah, and there's a reason Deshaun Watson has been in our dynasty discussion a lot over the last 12 months, because there's a lot of variance and a lot of value to be had. If you are right in the valuation differential or how you feel versus the marketplace, there's so much power to be had here. And I think it's interesting to see this perfect storm, because you have Amari Cooper, who has been ironed by dynasty folks for the last, most of his career, but certainly since he left Oakland, and just never quite getting to the heights, I guess, needed at the age requirement to meet some sort of equation that he's going to be highly valued by dynasty owners. And then you have David Njoku, also a guy that has been long since forgotten, but Austin Hooper gone. And you put all this together with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and now you infuse Deshaun Watson into a Browns team, and there's this cauldron bubbling up of potential of just a completely different look for this Browns offense. But for these 3 players specifically, in Cooper, Njoku, and Watson, of where have they been, but where are they going, and how are things different in them coming together in this passing game? And I'm just fascinated to watch this, because Njoku, when you look at pedigree, raw coming out, has not really put it together. You've seen tons of flashes, but you put him into a bigger role, and then you say Amari Cooper. I mean, what else is in this passing game at wide receiver if Jarvis Landry does not come back? It seems like that's one of the lone things remaining that could change here. And then you put in Deshaun Watson for half the season, most of the season, all of the season. And like you said, historic player that was right up there near Mahomes when this carousel stopped a couple of years ago, before Watson, was not playing a year ago. And this entire ride started in terms of where is he going to go in the dynasty space. So I just can't wait. I think the Browns are probably the most fascinating watch on offense this year, with all that is at stake with all that pedigree.
Totally. And I mean, I think it's funny because I was trying to pre-Watson trade. I was trying to see what I could get for Amari Cooper. I got laughed at some trade offers, and now I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I would do that now. Like the same offer that I got laughed at. I was like, I don't know if I would offer that again. And you look like, I don't know. We're always looking, and it's interesting at tight end. I think you have to take at tight end. You need some reason to believe in the range of, we'll say 5 to 20. 6 to 20, that the player is going to be an outlier, right? That somehow they have elite ceiling that other people in that range don't have. JuJu hasn't really shown that in his career to date. However, I don't think he's had a situation quite like this either. So when you look at it, I mean, I sort of take from him like he might be one of the swings that you take in that range. I think a lot of people think that too. So I wonder if there's going to be if you can actually make the jump from a guy like JuJu to an elite tight end who's already is elite, that might be cheaper and get you the same bet now. I think that'd be something that'd be interesting perusing. If you go young to old, for example, maybe the gap between him and Kelsey isn't quite as big as you might think, for example, as sort of the offseason hype begins to build. So that's another aspect that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and for Watson, some of the things I've seen are he's rising, first of all, and maybe it swoons back down if he's issued a suspension, and we kind of go down that rabbit hole yet again. But things are rising because of the fact that the grand jury part that was a couple of weeks ago, we've seen some semblance of clarity. The fact that he was traded, there was NFL comfort in trading for him and actually getting a deal done, where there's been a lot of talk to this point in time. But I think that Deshaun Watson and where he sits, even if he is rising, I know that I think QB 5, 6, 7 is dreadfully appropriate for him, because you say it's hard to get up in the top 3, 4, somewhere in that zone. But I really do think that beyond that number, Watson's right there with any other challengers in that next tier or so. And I have him aggressively so in that. And part of that is we were kind of both in lockstep of all you have to do is the time value of waiting last offseason, and you can get here. So the fact that it's worked out kind of on schedule, which is don't expect anything last year. We talked about that in July, August, of just don't expect any games from him. But at some point, you're going to see a guy in his 20s playing who has a profile of pretty high level stuff and on a different team. And it's kind of worked out. I mean, there's first rounders around him. There's a strong running game, and there's a lot of potential that this is he had DeAndre Hopkins and stuff, but this is probably the best overall offense he will have the ability to play for.
Yeah. And a good coaching staff. And there's rumors that people want to come play with him. I mean, and listen, everyone can sort of talk about this stuff with all that he's gone, all that's gone on with him and he's alleged to have done. But when you set that aside for a second, just put that in its own box. We're not going to really go in. We've talked about that enough at this point. And it's been talked about for a year. When you just look at the effect that these quarterbacks can have, right? We've seen that with Josh Allen. We've seen that with Mahomes, right? We've seen that with Herbert, right? They can get guys to come there, right? What are we seeing? Landry might come back, right? Will Fuller, mutual interest, no surprise. I think there's probably this situation is going to get better for this offense in some way, shape, or form, whether that's at the other wide receiver. And I still wonder, like, I don't think Kareem Hunt's any sure lock to make this roster. And if they have to open up some more cap space, whether it's to make a Landry fit or to make a Will Fuller fit, it wouldn't shock me to see Kareem Hunt in some way, shape, or form, either restructured or on his way out, just because it's a big number and there's no guarantee. It's like $6.5 million and there's no guarantees. So we'll see there. I do think there's probably another shoe, if not two shoes, to drop as a consequence of another potential wide receiver coming in. So all stuff that we'll look into and
Dearness Johnson. They brought Dearness Johnson back, and I find that interesting because Hunt is a guy we really haven't talked about with basically no dead cap and $6 million, and I guess Chase Edmonds is like, yeah, it's decent money, but it's like I think it's a redundancy. We saw Dearness Johnson fill in admirably when Nick Chubb and Hunt were out a year ago. So yeah, like you said, if they shift those dollars to the passing game, it does seem more prudent. It seems like that's a value add as opposed to Kareem Hunt, where they can easily exit stage right. And frankly, Hunt can find probably some better opportunities for extended playing time. But yeah, the rest of this quarterback carousel, I mean, you talk about, who would have thought? I mean, just one thing I was thinking about is Derek Carr getting Devontae Adams, and yet you still say they're DFL in that division, right? Like things need to break right for them with how the arms race in the AFC West has gone. And you get arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL, and you say, yep, still uphill climb. Like it basically doesn't affect their get to the end game odds. But all these quarterbacks, it's interesting. You've talked about Trubisky a couple of different times in terms of this offseason. We do get Jameis Winston back to the Saints, which It's interesting. A lot of these situations, I didn't do a lot of, behind the puppet strings of player value and formulas and all this kind of stuff. Like the historical probabilities for these quarterbacks, they largely, in my opinion, stay the same. Because Winston, we already saw him with the Saints. If the Saints don't want him back, that's probably more glaring than if they do. You get these nomadic guys like Mariota. I mean, he's not on some success track. Like, do we really think things are going to, Atlanta's more likely to have a top 5 pick than they are to make the playoffs next year. So, like, you just kind of go through Baker Mayfield has not been on the success track. He's on, probably going to be on the move. Like, he was already sort of dynasty explosive in terms of the downside of what things could happen and the Browns being interested in somebody else. I think it's just kind of interesting that the more things change, if you will, the more things stay the same.
Yeah, and I mean, you sort of hit that the other day when I think it was it last week or 2 weeks ago? They're melding together. But you had said like, hey, all these players that we expect to potentially change teams, they didn't, right? And so I think when you look at some of the consequences for the other guys, I don't think anyone really vaulted. I mean, other than the change in Watson, I think Matt Ryan's more interesting now. He's probably going to have a better supporting cast.
Yeah, good point.
I think that he's one that's probably gotten better. And it looks like, too, that they actually guaranteed basically the rest of his deal, which locks him in for 2 years.
This isn't a Phillip Rivers type situation. This doesn't feel like a swan song or a farewell. I mean, Ryan has more left arm, more left mobility. And frankly, this is a good situation that Ryan, he really hasn't had this in quite a while. When you talk about a really nice run game. And again, I'm not the biggest Pittman fan out there, but Ryan can do good things with modest talent. Okay, talent around him. Does Paris Campbell get healthy? Does he actually get some looks? They're not probably done adding to this depth chart as well. Jonathan, you get a big time run game for Matt Ryan, under center, play action game. He's going to run that offense. So I don't know if that means a top 10 season. That is tough to get to without much mobility, but he's going to be fully functional and a guy that if you have him as your QB3 in a premium format, I mean, this is going to be just a warm, one of those weighted blankets on you. I mean, you're just going to fall asleep in a snuggie like environment pretty instantly with someone like Matt Ryan stably handling your QB2-3 reins.
That's what we have actually in a team that we co-manage together. So yeah, hey, one other player. I mean, they still have cap space. I wonder what Julio Jones is doing right now. Little Matt Ryan reunion.
Yep.
They certainly could make that work if that's something that they wanted to try on an experimental basis and see. I think that'd be fascinating and fun to watch back in a dome together. That'd be quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, when you look at this, I started tracking this. I think it's 8. I had, by my count, 8 teams are changing quarterbacks between week 1 last year and this year, and that doesn't include. I haven't put Trey Lance in that category yet.
Well, because Garoppolo's still there, I think that's a smart thing for you to kind of hold that button. It's grayed. It's not black and it's not white.
Do you like? I don't. Listen. Sig is our resident like drum beat hearer. Like he hears the drum beats. He can feel these things coming. I'll tell you, I'm not in the Lance business, but if I was in the Lance business, it feels.
It's pivot season. It's like wedding season. It's pivot season.
Right.
Top 10 alert. Right. Market value alert here.
Yes. Yeah. I don't, it does not make me feel good.
Well, this is the do not be surprised, right? If ... we get down the line and it's like Trey Lance, we start hearing Garoppolo getting first team reps. First, it starts with him not being moved. And then that they're splitting time or Garoppolo's getting first team reps in camp. Then you start to see Garoppolo as first quarterback out in some of these preseason games. Again, just don't be surprised. Right. Don't be surprised. We're not saying that that's the 75% favorite bet here, but don't be surprised. And this is about a quarterback that's what? QB, it's egregiously high, Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
it's like 10 or 11. Right?
Yeah, I mean, top 10 or 12, which when you consider the movement in that range of, guys like Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers stabilizing over the last 12 months, Russell Wilson in or just above that zone, Deshaun Watson, heavy. This is heavy artillery. And when you say, no, pass, hard pass, give me Trey Lance. This is not exactly Lamar Jackson sparsely playing his rookie season and then blowing up in year 2 type vibes here. This is not what we have going on.
No, it's certainly not. And I mean, let me ask you this. If let's just play out a scenario for a second, because I've been thinking about this. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that Kyle Shanahan, all the reports last year were actually true. That Kyle Shanahan made that trade up with the intent to take Mac Jones. And then he got talked out of it. How would that play out over the next year?
Yeah.
Kind of like it has, right? Isn't
Right.
that kind of what happened? Whereas what would you expect? Well, he didn't go and play him, right? He didn't rush out and sort of endorse him as a starter. He played the guy that he was comfortable with.
This is like Ron Rivera with Dwayne Haskins, where it's like, not really my guy. I mean, what do I do here? I'll start him a little bit, and they ended up starting him like 5-6 games, I remember, and then moving on to someone else. But Garoppolo's a pro. I know everyone wants to bag on him, and again, he makes a lot of throws he thinks he can make, and he makes some egregious errors, but almost in a Carson Wentz-like way. I think Garoppolo has this treatment that he's worse than he is for the simple reason that people remember most graphically the worst plays he's made at the worst times. And that's not to say that there isn't something inside wrong, that means the DNA is not there to be an elite quarterback. I'm not going to get into the weeds for that. But all I mean is the perception of him is a little different than the aggregate. What does he put to his profile in his career to date? And Garoppolo has that. Garoppolo has that to him because there's plenty of good play. There's plenty of good teams. He can be a part, as Greg Cosell, the tagline he would say is, if a team is built around him, he can certainly be a successful NFL quarterback. Those types of lines.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think it's a sure bet that Lance takes that job.
We talk about probabilities, right? I mean, probabilities, right? If Trey Lance was QB 20, we wouldn't really say this stuff, right? So a big part of it is the cost. We're talking about in a range of heavy hitters. We just talked about the quarterbacks in this range. That's what makes Trey Lance the most scary, is if you're sitting in a startup draft or you say no every single day to exploring the market in your league on pivoting to any of these guys. Or, Matt Ryan plus, in a super flex league. And then you end up holding the bag in week one because Garoppolo's there and there's a lot more smoke to this. And 12 months from now, Trey Lance gets traded because he's not part of the plans. Still, then you deserve everything you get in terms of opportunity cost missed. You deserve all of it because all we're doing is talking about it. Right. And we're moving in that direction. One step at a time. We're moving in that direction.
It's slow, and again, it's about probabilities. But it's way too
all the quarterbacks getting traded, getting moved, getting signed, and Garoppolo is not one of them. Quarterback frenzy. Look at all these guys. Winston, Wentz. If Mayfield gets moved, Watson got moved. Trubisky, Mariota. All these guys. You know what name I didn't mention? Garoppolo, which was probably in December, January, the first name people were mentioning.
Right.
Russell Wilson got moved. Garoppolo vice script.
Not so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because there was a John Lynch quote out, or it was attributed to that John Lynch is telling teams when they come asking about Garoppolo that he has a firm offer of 2 seconds in hand, right? If he wants to take it, that has to be Houston, right? That's the only team that could possibly be true for us, Houston,
I guess.
And I mean, I'm surprised he hasn't. If that's true and he hasn't taken it, that seems wild to me. And the other thing is like there's not going to be, right, if they're not taking that, there's not going to be a lot of buyers, right? They're not going to trade him to San Francisco or to Seattle. And is Carolina really going to be in on this? Because if they are, they're doing the exact same thing they just did with Darnold, right? They're doing the exact same thing. And then what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to pay him. Right, so you're going to have to pay what's, and you don't have any day 2 picks because you just traded them, made bad trades with them all, right? It's just, I mean, listen, and this is.
But that's what you said you liked about the Trubisky deal, or probably the same. No, but the same thing about the Winston deal. It doesn't cost picks. Right. You take a shot on a guy and you took it for half price of what a decent starter NFL quarterback costs these days, which is 25 to 30 probably, and you're paying half that on a deal where you can probably get out of after 1 year. You can stay for 2 if you want. You can draft a guy. You can still do whatever you want. Right. That's why I love I love the Winston deal, especially just because it's a palatable price point, but yet it's a guy that's done something.
Right. Same thing with the Mariota deal. Right, like even Mariota's done less than Winston has, but it doesn't preclude them from taking any. It doesn't preclude them from taking any other bet. They can do anything. They can still do anything that they want, and you get. It's not a free shot, but you get one that doesn't cost you picks. All it costs you money is that you have to spend against the salary cap anyways to take a shot on a quarterback that was a first rounder, depending on who you're talking about. Top 5 pick, depending on who you're talking about.
I got one more point at quarterbacks in premium formats, which is remember to value the player, not the age, because this happened years ago with Drew Brees. It happened with Phillip Rivers for 2-3 years before he retired. And it happened with Tom Brady already 2 or 3 different times with these up and downs, and now he's retired. And no, you don't drop him. No, you don't sell him. Like I saw some of these offers, like people would try to get him for a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th or something because he's retired. For that span of time. That take the risk that they're going to keep playing because they're usually dreadfully underpriced. I mean, Matt Ryan right now is near QB 30 or something. It's egregious. Right. The assumption that he's playing 1 year and out. Tom Brady, right? If you acquire Tom Brady right now and he plays more than this 1 year, it's a landslide deal.
Right.
Landslide. Every year, like Drew Brees in those last 3 or so, printing money.
Right.
So, I mean, it's unbelievable. You want to look towards those profiles. And right now, those are the ones that stand out. Aaron Rodgers, he's also never going up again. I mean, his ADP within the position is going to start with a 1 with a blank behind it, or higher. Yeah, I mean, it's going to go that, QB 10, 15, 20. It's not going up. He will never get back up into the stratosphere again. Why? Too old. Too old. He just signed a big deal. He's playing. This is he's playing. I will say now, he's playing at 40 years old. That includes this year, next year, and one more. May not be for the Packers. But I just think this assumption that these quarterbacks that have figured out how to play from the pocket, not get killed, which some of these younger quarterbacks are running around and still trying to figure it out. And who knows if they ever get there? Probably not. Teaser. But these quarterbacks that can win from the pocket, and they've been doing it for a decade and a half or more, and now you want to throw them out at 37, 39, 40, 41, when Dynasty has thrown them out. I mean, this is exactly what you want to invest in. So Matt Ryan is like the dude. The fact that he's on a good offense. He's going to be protected, and they can run the ball. He can not make the same decisions in clutch moments that Carson Wentz did, which, again, really rubbed Dynasty GMs the wrong way late in that season, especially Jacksonville game, to cost them the playoffs and those 2 games in a row. But, I mean, Matt Ryan, it's printing money in like the 30s, QB 30 to 35. He can play. People would rather take Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder. I mean, it's unbelievable. Jordan Love, the shots that they would take on a player you have no idea if they can play. None. Give me the old guy.
Give me the old guy. Is this something is this a product of our age? Right? Is this we're getting to this age of we're surrounding these guys in age, and we're like, hey, Matt Ryan isn't really that old.
I went to college with Matty Ice. I was at BC. Yeah.
Wait a second.
Yeah, I know. They're like, hey, everyone's discounting us. People think Jordan can't ride his bike with the requisite amount of wattage.
Right.
People think Chad getting a little gray. I don't think he can hang. No. Probably the same thing.
Yeah.
35 is the new 26.
Right.
It's probably a little bit of that. But you know what I think also it is? I think we value the current dynasty year a little more. I think we value that this year matters.
Yeah.
And let's wait till January until next year matters. And that's not to say we build redraft teams, certainly. But when you look at some of these profiles, it's funny that people think that, you have to be a dead red quote unquote win now team to have or acquire Matt Ryan. No, you can still be on a 3-year window. I think that's probably the biggest difference here.
Right. And plus, he gives you outs too, right? Like he
Right.
might not be the person that you want to start, in a semifinal week, but he might be a stepping stone to either plug a gap for you or help you along the way to get to that. Whether there's another trade along the way, right? He gives you options, right? And I think that that's the thing with him is, if he's going to be basically a quarterback 2 innings eater type, that's great because he'll give you options, especially at that that quarterback 3 cost. I mean, come on.
Yep. Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 96 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. Just like when we started, we'll get to about 100 about NFL draft time. So that's pretty apropos. And again, we got some Dynasty trades, got a couple quotes here to finish out the show. Wanted to start with a heavy hitter in Superflex. So this is almost how much does it take and is this right to get to one of the big boys at the position? So this is getting in Superflex Josh Allen and T. Higgins for Matthew Stafford, A.J. Brown, and Jerry Jeudy.
Oh, this is really interesting because the answer is clearly Josh Allen, but let's just put that aside for a second. How many quarterbacks would you rather have right now than that? Do you feel better about over the next 3 to 4 years than Matthew Stafford?
Right.
Because I think the answer is 4 or 5.
That's it.
There's other guys that like may be better than him, but in terms of security, in terms of like feeling good at his floor,
right,
feeling really comfortable with his ceiling, kind of knowing what the whole thing is going to look like, coaching staff, supporting cast, like we kind of know the front office is good. They keep bringing in talent, like we've seen that. He's locked in contract wise, right? I mean, all of that, right? Yep. All of the stuff around him. Extremely insulated. I talk about, my Supermax quarterbacks. He made the list today, right? He's number 6 behind Mahomes, Herbert, Allen, Watson, Prescott, right? He's right there. Again, would I straight put him at quarterback 6? That's a little bit more complicated in terms of exactly where I would draft him. But right. I think like when you look at the security, when you look at the upside, when you look at all
6 doesn't matter. 6 doesn't matter because he's like in the 12, 14, right. 15 sort of Correct. Range. So whether you have him at 6 or 9 or whatever. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So the answer to this question is Josh Allen, but the pivot off of Josh Allen to Mahomes or to Stafford, I think is an interesting one where in terms of this, it's a lot higher ceiling, I think, for Allen. But when you look at like the floor, like if you can go Allen to Stafford plus, like, I mean, a big plus, and this Jerry Jeudy isn't a big plus at all.
This ain't it, by the way.
This ain't it, but there are deals out there that you and I could construct that would be right. When we took a step back and looked at it, be like, wow. Like, and I think that the market is bigger than probably you and I are between Josh Allen and Stafford, right? Again, I'm high on Stafford, and I'm high on Josh Allen too, but I'm higher on Stafford than most of the market is. I think you could get a lot back, and this isn't anywhere near a lot. You could get a lot back and really cover that gap and really, I think, reshape your team in a way that you'd be surprised about.
Well, I'm glad you covered the quarterback part because I wanted to hit the wide receiver part of this, which is I think Jerry Jeudy and A.J. Brown, my go-to line with these guys are always like, who did they sleep with? Like, sorry, Joe. But I just think that like they are so overcooked for what they have done. I told you that the worst and best thing that I ever did was had this feeder to now that I have their adjusted points per game finishes right next to, with year 1, year 2, year 3, etc. right there with my rankings. Mm-hmm. So it's literally a few cells over where now I see like if something really doesn't make sense, I'll be like, like, why is this guy ahead of this guy? Why are they in different tiers when they're basically identical? And A.J. Brown, I mean, he's had 1 year inside the top 24 in adjusted points per game, and yet everyone wants to crown him. It's the Dennis Green. You want to crown him? Yeah, we know how that goes. I mean, up in the top 5 to 8. Are we serious? How many passes did A.J. Brown get? Right. He's going to be living off that 1 year for how many more? It's unbelievable. So I don't get this. Like T. Higgins versus A.J. Brown it should definitely be like through 2 years, they're basically identical. A.J. Brown's played one more and he took a step back. T. Higgins, he's in a better situation. I mean, you might not say that he's going to be the clear number one for his team like AJ Brown, but other than that, I mean, quarterback, advantage Higgins. I mean, age curve, advantage Higgins. Not having a step back in year 3, advantage Higgins. Like, and yet they're not viewed, in the same ilk in the dynasty community. So that's one part. And the other part is Jerry Jeudy. Sorry, you're a speed bump in this deal. That's what I mean. And again, who has he been in bed with? Because I mean, Jerry Jeudy has finished like wide receiver 50 something to 60s for 2 years. And I guess round 1 in Alabama gets you every pass. Are we sure he's the wide receiver 1 and he's going to be the big top 5, top 10 finish uptick guy with Russell Wilson? Are we sure it's not Cortland Sutton? Are we sure
it's not Tim Patrick?
Are we sure it's not Tim Patrick? Are we sure it's not KJ Hamler? Are we sure there's a definitive correct answer here with a strong volume passing game from Russell Wilson, and it is Jerry Jeudy?
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't be sure. I would not be sure. Like, it seems like the dynasty is like 75% the answer is Jerry Jeudy, combo the rest of the answers of 25%. And I think it's much more like Judy's maybe the slight favorite, but we're talking like 31% and Sutton is 28%.
Right.
And then the other guys are much higher percentage points than, like you said. I mean, don't forget Tim Patrick. That's the part that gets me. Like, to get to Allen, you got to pay. Like, you talk about Stafford plus, and like all these machinations at quarterback. I know AJ Brown and adding Jeudy to get to Higgins is not it. Like, that's not it. Not it.
No, it's forcing you to make a bet in a range where it's a terrible bet to make. Like, trying to pick between Higgins and AJ Brown is really hard. Like you said, and I think you could make an argument that Higgins is higher than Brown, and Jeudy doesn't move the needle. So what are we doing? Right? I mean,
but a lot of people think Jeudy does move the needle. Like, I got Amari Cooper plus, and not just like a funsy, yeah, you got a token plus, an actual plus in a deal, because people don't like Cooper and people love and want to give passes to guys like Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah.
God. Okay. How about FFPC, where we do have a cut down coming in 9 days now. So that is a big point on the offseason calendar, getting down to 16.
Probably have a meeting about that.
Total players. Yeah. Family conference. Family conference. So this is a 12-team FFPC Superflex. So you even got that big of a squeeze. JuJu Smith-Schuster for a 4th and a 5th this year and a 2nd next year. And I wanted you to hit on, I mean, JuJu Smith-Schuster, where does he sit? Because you can't really have a lot of excess fat at wide receiver in this type of format. And if he's really close to whatever cut line there is, that has that factor into trading in this format, because it's applicable over the next few days.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I mean, this is like, he seems like a good bet to make in deeper dynasty, right?
Traditional formats. Yeah.
In traditional formats, right? I mean, let's pick the guy that was really good at 17 years old and has a depressed price because he's been hurt for the past year, right? Like, isn't that kind of the bet that you want? Like, that's a historically a good bet. He was good as a rookie, right? And people will say, and so someone asked me just this week about, well, wasn't it just because of him and basically being on the other side of Antonio Brown? I said, well, if that's the case, right? I mean, it's a good situation to sort of rekindle that, because he's playing with a better quarterback on the other side of Tyreek Hill and Kelsey, right? So, and a lot of the stuff, there's some film folks that have broke this down and say, some of the stuff that he really does, which is the underneath zone beating stuff, which they had trouble with last year, is actually where he excelled, and that's what makes him a good fit. So I think he can eat volume wise. The question is again, that's right. If you're really, if that's your wide receiver 4 or 5 in Dynasty, in FFPC, that's tough to roster, right? I mean, it's just from a roster construction perspective, we don't want to be rostering a ton of wide receivers. I think the market would roster more. We would say roster less and take some of the pick flexibility, So in a deeper format, I like the Smith-Schuster side of this, I think. But in FFPC, it really is dependent on how tight you are to that number. And I think that this isn't a horrible cash out, because a lot of times you're forced. There isn't a huge market, right? There's not a big other side for this.
There's not a lot of teams that are like, well, I only have 12 positional players. I need to get to 14.
Correct. Right. And so that's a lot of so you are, if you're on the buy, you're getting deals on the buy side usually in FFPC at this time, because there's not that many people operating on that side typically. So
I just don't like this deal though. Like here's the part that I don't like. JuJu, I know on face value, it looks like he's going to be a humdrum, maybe wide receiver 3-4 fantasy wise. He'll have some good games, but certainly not a guy you're going to feel tremendous about weekly. But the upside of if Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce miss time,
right?
That's the part that scares me, of saying he could eat and get right back to those 2 top 12 seasons he had when he opened his career. Like that's the part that I would just try to find another way. And what I don't like is you got a 4th and a 5th, where it's like, I know you can't. Could you have got an injury away running back with explosive upside?
But then you're running into the same problem. Right?
I know it's a 1-for-1. But my point is, I think JuJu is one of the few wide receivers. You look at the situation, he's actually done that before. And so it really bothers me, because we know it's been a black hole. This whole the wide receiver 2 there doesn't produce. Look at what they've been doing.
Right.
I mean, Demarcus Robinson and McCole Hardman's been a flame out, and Byron Pringle, these are nomads.
Right.
Get out of here. Right. JuJu Smith-Schuster is a guy that he could have been here last year.
Right.
I mean, with the offer. So that's the part that bothers me, that you really had no other outs. You had to dump. This to me feels like a dump. Seconds, I just don't value them that highly in FFPC. I just don't.
Yeah.
And I know it's tight. I know you got to keep 2-3 quarterbacks in Superflex in this one. I get it. And if he's your, like you said, if he's your QB wide receiver 4-5, it's really tough. I get it. But I just think there's weekly starter potential where you don't even think about it. He's in my lineup. And I'm not going to say that about a lot of fringe wide receivers, but he's one of them. I would. I don't know. It stinks to me. It stinks to me. And I know he could be I guess technically your 18th guy, for the 16-man cut. I get that. But could you have gotten a first from dealing a guy 3-4 spots up, or a second plus, and you keep JuJu instead of doing this? That would be my only question. I know about clearing spots, but there's other ways too.
That's the best answer, is that, was there another pivot? Right. Was there another pivot? Because here's the thing too. Like, if we have one of these spots where we're tight on, where we're struggling at wide receiver, and you need to come up with answers. I mean, that JuJu Smith-Schuster scenario that you laid out, which is a Tyreek Hill injury,
multiple outs,
a Travis Kelce injury, a Travis Kelce all of a sudden regression, which, by the way, there were signs of last year. Again, it sort of is masqueraded by the fact that he was 25% better than everyone. So when he takes a 20% haircut, it kind of blends in with the top guys at the position. We don't notice it all that much, but that's why he's so darn good and valuable, is he was that, when you're that good, you have that much leeway. But if those things go wrong, right, if
it turns into triplets, right? I mean, let's not pretend like there's not untapped upside for just better players surrounding Patrick Mahomes. Yes. And he can just the tide will just go up, and there'll stop being inefficiencies with going towards other guys.
Right. Normal dynasty, just consolidate second for him, right? Superflex.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Maybe late first if someone's bullish, right? But somewhere in that, probably 10 to 15, yeah.
Okay.
All right, reminder about signing up for the Football Guys daily email update. You want to go to the top right corner of the Football Guys homepage. You can get all the news distilled from Joe Bryant into the information you need to know in the offseason, especially. You're going to get links to articles coming out. We had a great series looking at players that have been on the move in free agency, giant roundtable across the also some new names in the Football Guys staff that you want to get acquainted with as we get to the prime months post NFL draft leading up to the season itself. So that daily email update, your league mates are on it. You don't want to miss out. And it's always a fail safe. Even if you're like, you're not along, you're like, 3/4 of the stuff, you're like, oh, I saw that on Twitter. I know about this. Someone in my group chat's been mentioning that, but you will miss something. And this is a collaborative effort to make sure that we don't miss anything, so you don't miss anything as well. All right. And just to make sure Jordan and Chad don't become their parents, do we really need a sign to live, laugh, and love? All right. So quotes from the Football Guys Dynasty Forum this week. So what do you want for insert player name here as a message in your Dynasty League, where you see that in a chat, maybe someone sent you a private message, or they sent you the old blank offer that includes a player on your side, nobody on their side, and they're like, hey, what do you want? Do the work for me. What are your thoughts on this type of activity in Dynasty Leagues?
I think it has its place. And here's the thing. I mean, I don't pretend to know what the other person is thinking. And I know people will give you advice like, well, make it make sense for them. Like, I mean, you and I come from different roster construction perspectives, right? What makes sense for us?
I'm looking at your roster and it looks nonsensical, so I can't make sense of it. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah, three defenses.
Right. So it's really tough for me to do that and me to put myself in other people's spots. And frankly, I think it's borderline arrogant to do that. So I don't really get involved with that. And sometimes it's hard to know, right? And I've made deals where it's like, hey, what do you want for when Saquon Barkley got hurt? What do you want for Saquon Barkley? I really didn't know what to offer the guy. I didn't know what he was thinking. I honestly, I didn't know what he wanted. I really didn't know. I was willing to pay a sufficient price for him. I was willing to make a deal for him, but I couldn't tell you what the guy wanted. Is he rebuilding? Is he playing for this year? Right? Because those, if I'm going to make one deal for him and it's a reject, I don't know how I missed. Did I miss on the construction perspective? Did I miss on the value perspective? So I just asked, and it ended up being a couple of picks. And I was like, all right, I'll do the deal. Right. And it wouldn't have been something I wouldn't have guessed that. Right. Like, that's not what I would have proposed to him. So I do think I don't think it matters in every case. Like, I wouldn't do this in every case. And can be a little, it can be a little much, and you might not get anyone really responding to you. But I do think it has in situations where you have moving player valuations, right? Suspensions, injuries, where it's a little bit of a black box and you don't really know what the person is thinking at all. I don't have a problem with this. And honestly, like if someone does this to me, I have no problem with it. And I think it's responsible when when you have a situation where there's a lot of unknowns, because you don't know what to offer them. Or if they just straight reject you, you don't really know how you missed. And you could get to a deal that was just better calibrated if you just knew, right? Like, if I bring home flowers for my wife and she just hates the color pink, and I bring home,
I'd interpret she hated flowers, or you might interpret like that might have been not enough to save the day. It just might not have been the day for flowers. So.
Right. And it's that, she's still mad at me. No, she just hates pink. Right. Like,
or, I guess it could be like a job interview, right? I mean, I didn't get the job. So it's a binary, or like you had a rejection on a trade, same sort of thing. So the outcome was X. But if you got no feedback, well, it was that goofball tie you wore, or it's it's the fact that you showed up 5 minutes late. It's the fact that you wrote out your resume. It's the fact that your previous employer said that you were a sad sack, that they were fortunate to get out of your contract, or what, like, so you never know.
The other guy was just better, right? Like, you were great. The other guy was just better.
Right. You were a top 5% candidate, and you lost out because they happened to have a top 1% guy show up that day.
100%.
Yeah. Right. But you'll never know. Yeah, and that's why it's so important. It's amazing the number of times, like, I've become a master at similar offers. Similar offers in my mind, but yet they're going to look different because, hey, you might value this, like, it's a first rounder, let's say, and a second rounder. Well, if I sub out the first rounder for guys that I think are worth a first rounder, and then I do all those iterations, and then I sub out the second for players that I think are worth a second rounder, I bet there's going to be such a wide range of feelings about all those, even though I view them similarly. They might view them as, some of them are double in value to some of the other ones because of how they feel about the construction. So yeah, I think it's, or the player, the position combo, or things like that. So yeah, I think it's a really great exercise to do. And frankly, it's one thing that I see in FFPC a lot, which is someone will put out a post that basically says, here's 4, 5, 6 players that are available, and they put the price point on each one. Here's the players that are a first or a second or a third. And you know what? I see deals get done. Why? Yeah. Transparency and clarity of, here, hey, offer me this pick for this player. You got him.
And I will take it.
And it might be unreasonable, but at least everyone's on the same page.
Right.
You don't have to guess, like you said.
One counter I've seen to this, and I don't agree with it, but I've seen this, is that people will say like, "Oh, it actually dumbs down the market. You actually get a worse deal." I don't think that's true. Right? I don't. Whenever someone is giving you information,
what do you mean you get a worse deal? What does that mean?
That basically the ask. If I were to ask you, "Hey, what do you want for Saquon Barkley?"
The price goes up because you asked.
It goes up. I actually don't think that's true.
Jordan's interested. That's at plus 10%.
Right. And maybe that ends up being, hey, they weren't thinking about trading them. Right. And we've used the example of someone walks up to my house and says, "I'll buy it." Well, it wasn't really for sale. Well, if you offer 4x what I paid for it, like, all right, we're going to move, like that. You just don't, honey pack, like we got to get going. We got to pack up.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Right. We're moving quickly. We're recording the Football Guys Dynasty show from a tent, probably. But yeah, I mean, you don't know what that deal can be if you sometimes you just have to ask, right? And I think that I don't think it's insulting. And frankly, there's a lot of offers that go down where, if I'm trying to, like, I've tried to trade for Darren Waller in a few spots. I put together a few different constructions all over the place. And if the person just doesn't like the tight ends that I'm sending, it doesn't see tight end like I see it, they're not going to be on the buy side of who I'm selling them. That doesn't mean they're not willing to trade me Waller. And if I'm just getting straight rejects, I don't know that he's attainable. You're
playing whack-a-mole. You just have no idea.
Right.
And that's the unfortunate part. It's playing in the dark. Playing in the dark with offers, basically around yourself.
Correct.
Because you don't know. You're guessing.
100%. Yeah.
All right. We got one more here. And I thought this was interesting because we talk about profiles a lot. So I kind of wonder what you think about these two profiles, both round one running backs. Certainly the career arc to date for both of them has not been ideal, or let's even say typical of what a round one running back does. Okay. I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Travis Etienne as similar value.
Oh, that's interesting. I think that Etienne has a ceiling that, like, we haven't seen much of it, but I think his passing game resume presents a ceiling that we could probably think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire at this point doesn't have. And there's not a ton of evidence to suggest that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is that good of a pass catcher. There wasn't in college. There really hasn't been in the NFL. People confused volume with good, and vaulted him up. And I think that when given the opportunity in key moments, they split touches between him and Darrell Williams. Right, Darrell Williams is a free agent right now, so I mean, we like Darrell Williams, but that's a bit of an indictment. And they passed. I still can't believe they passed on him for. They passed on Jonathan Taylor to take Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's a story for a different day. So I think
of those guys, not just Jonathan Taylor,
Swift,
any of them.
Right, Swift. So yeah, I mean, listen, there's an uncertainty with Etienne. There's an uncertainty in the coaching staff change, injury wise, right? There's all of that. Is this offense going to be good? Right? There's a lot of uncertainty there. James Robinson clouds this for sure. Depending on his rehab and all that. But I think that he has a ceiling that, listen, if you miss on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, what are you missing on? Like a
well, I was going to ask
running
you,
back 10 finish.
Well, have we seen his career year? Do you think in 3 or 4 years we look back and year one Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the best it ever was? We do see that. We do see sometimes the flourish to start, and it just sort of fades to mediocrity for a little bit, and then it's over.
Yeah. And what would that was like running back? I think it was
22.
Like running back.
I have had adjusted points per game was 22. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I think he probably does better, but even if he does better in like the finishes as running back 14, that's not a huge difference between 22. And if a guy like Etienne has a ceiling of top 5 finish in his range of outcomes, which I think with his receiving profile could, I don't think it's all that likely that Edwards-Helaire does. And, if the median is higher for a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? Where maybe his middle range of outcomes is higher than Etienne's because he's hit, like we kind of know a little bit more about him. I think that the range of outcomes is actually wider for Etienne and covers a more of a difference-making ceiling. So I'd lean that way. But I think like you're asking the right question. And when you look at just like, hey, what are odds of hitting? Edwards-Helaire, by the fact that he's a round one guy with a hit on his resume, already has a really good odds of hitting again. And I know that it hasn't been smooth to date. But I think when you look at Etienne, I think he's got a higher potential outcome, and I would lean towards that because it could make, if you miss on Etienne, you can kind of make up what you miss in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, sort of playing the one injury away guys. So that would sort of be my thought. Again, I think it's the right question to ask, and depending on what you're solving for, you could go the other way.
Let's finish out with one question from the chat. Jeremy asks, are y'all in or out on Cam Akers? I assume that is a question related to his cost, because that's always the kind of the spectrum we look at here. So what do you think about now in later March 2022? Are you in or out on Cam Akers, the asset?
I think it depends on the cost, right? It's funny because he was like running back 6 at a period of time when he came back, and now he's like well into the teens.
How dare you play in a historically fast fashion coming back from Achilles, an injury that has derailed so many running backs we can't even say them all.
Yes.
I'm going to punish you for playing. How dare you play late this season? Why couldn't you just be like J.K. Dobbins and not play?
Right.
Don't play.
It's like Mayfield. If he had just sat out, he probably would have been better off. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think at that, there's a lot of guys in that range. Right? He's not going in that much of a different range than a guy like Barkley. Yeah. Right? I think you can make a lot of.
What's funny is I have him exactly on the ADP number, like in my rankings. So am I in or out? Sure. My answer is going to be sure. Right. I guess.
Right, I guess.
Yeah, because I have traded him away. I've actually traded for him in both occasions. I do wonder if the ceiling is super high. I don't know if he's going to get the receiving done. The Rams just keep adding around Matthew Stafford. I don't know why they wouldn't just keep having fun in the passing game. Cam Akers, when you talk about being in a depth chart with another day 2 guy in Darrell Henderson, I think that's a factor. Are they done adding? Do they need a number 3 guy? They have to have questions about Akers and Henderson probably in carrying the load for X amount of time, because neither one has really done it in the NFL level. But that said, I mean, the fact that Akers was able to get cleared, able to come back, and now you're going to add an extra 8 months onto that, there's the potential that we rewind the clock and get all the way back to what Akers, the potential or what the plan might have been for 2021. Mm-hmm. So get all the way back to that. So I actually think if I were to go one way or another, I would say I'm in, because he's a guy that is on a big time offense. There's big time lead back workhorse potential. We did see that a little bit a couple of seasons ago. And again, I think he has the upside to be that come out of quote unquote nowhere, and that he hasn't done it yet, to be a top 5-6 guy. I think that is in him. And when you're saying that you're going to pay running back 15 to 20, then I think that's the kind of calculus and upside you want from that range. You want to take a big swing where he could get back to that. Frankly, he was, like you said, in the top 6 or 7 when it was just on the prospect of, we think he might. We think he might. And then he didn't. And it was like, well, let's keep him at 12.
Right.
He's out for the year. Let's keep him at 12. So that would be one of my big points. I will say, I mean, can we just shout out to Leonard Fournette? Like,
oh yeah. How did we go 53 minutes without talking about Lombardi Lenny?
Like the 30s of running back position. I got some offers for him this week, and I'm like, hey, this is Tampa or bust, baby. Like, and the fact that he got 3 for, I mean, it's probably a 1 or 2 year construction, but the point is 3 for 21 or whatever, waiting this long. And I mean, top 5, top 6 PPR, just crushing.
Totally in his range of outcomes.
Can you imagine? I mean, like how things look differently 12 to 18 months ago. If you're like, man, all I got is Fournette and Connor, and I don't know. I'm just going to try to tape this thing together and make it work. Like, you're just like, when is week 1? Give me the fork and knife. Where's my opponent? I'm going to set my lineup now. That's where we sit with these old guys. I got Kamara. God, he's probably going to get cut or something. All these 27. You can have like the greatest running back core. Yeah, I'll flex Zeke, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
All 27-year-olds.
I'm just gonna bludgeon.
Well-
So what was your answer on the Etienne Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing?
Notice how I didn't. I thought you covered it adequately. No, I agree with you. I again, if I match, I mean, if we're playing the match game, I would just like pull up the same card. I mean, I don't know. If
Okay, all right.
saying
Well,
it.
the way you
No,
answered the Akers thing, I figured you had to take Etienne. So that was
I mean, I agree with you. I think there's a wider range of outcomes. That Edwards-Helaire is probably not likely to change the course of any particular season. That him getting better could mean like running back 16. Like,
correct.
But what does that mean in the relative scope? It means something. I mean, obviously it's good news compared to what his value is now and what he did last year. But Etienne could get into the top 5, top 6.
Yeah.
But yeah,
late first for Fournette.
Oh yeah, smash.
Do you give a late first for Connor?
Well, it's weird that it feels like a different question, right?
Which is wild because his contract, if you actually look at it, it's essentially guaranteed for 2 years, right? It's a wild thing, right? So
27, both of them have been wildly underappreciated at multiple points of their career for what they've done.
Yep.
But that was the thing. When I started looking, like when Connor got signed, I looked at my rankings and I was like, it's so weird that a lot of the data that drives into it, I was like, it seems like I'm very, very bullish on him, and yet he's still in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
It was really weird how that goes. And yet, if I was just like playing this out on like, oh, like if we were doing redraft style, I mean, how high is Connor? Right?
Real high.
Top 10?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I mean he's absolutely running back 1, I would think, right?
27,
I haven't ranked everyone, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe one of the
fears ahead of Barkley, right?
Maybe one of the fears is kind of athletically or as a specimen, he's kind of just a guy, right? So I would guess if we're doing this narrative type, that one of the risks is he's just a guy, he's 27, he does a lot of things good enough. Mm-hmm. But if the next 18 months is like rough on him and he loses a step, is that the end of it? Like it just completely goes. Mm-hmm. And he's an absolute plotter, and it's like get him off the field, I guess would be one risk factor. But I don't know. I still feel too low on Connor. Mm-hmm. It's weird. I feel like he needs to artificially be higher. Mm-hmm. Like if you said, I want Connor over Cam Akers, it's like, well, I understand that. Like it sounds like you're valuing the next 2 seasons pretty highly. And you're like, well, if Akers blows up, I mean, it still doesn't mean I technically lose the deal.
Yeah.
Market value wise, you probably lose the deal. So.
Right.
He's just a tough one to like. I had Fournette significantly higher, but yet you kind of look at it and you're like, well, similar age. But Fournette's been there, done that. He's done it every single year. I mean, it's pretty laughable what Fournette's done
since he got waived by Jacksonville.
Waived.
He has won more playoff games 5 than Jacksonville has won games 4.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. I had to look that up because I was thinking about it. I was like, this has to be
you're
picked first twice in a row. Like he's had to have won more playoff games.
Your German Shepherd ear picked something up. You're like, what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What? Okay. All right. Well, we finally got back to we talked super flex quarterbacks and we talked running back profiles. Not a bad day at the office, dare I say.
I woke up this morning and it was like 8:30. Dropped the girls off at school and I saw Leonard Fournette re-sign with Tampa and I said today's gonna be a great day.
Yeah. All of a sudden the rain stopped, the clouds cleared, and it was a sunny, beautiful day. That's what they said in Speed, right? It's gonna be a beautiful morning. So anyway, in this episode, we discussed Superflex quarterbacks up at the top, changing landscape of the position. Talked playoff Lenny, of course, James Conner, Cam Akers, a few others as we closed out the show. Plus, some talk about how to dynasty trade in your leagues. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.